We are very happy to have you here.
That's great. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. I'm going to talk about our adventures in Totaljobs Group with Scrum. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history, how we got to where we are today. We gave the group, we gave you guys a number of topics to see what you wanted to hear about. And the one that came out on top was metrics and measurement in Agile, which is a topic we all struggle with, I think. So I'm going to talk about what we've done in that area and get some of your input and some of your feedback on what you think about what we've done, what you've tried in your own companies. And you guys also expressed an interest in sort of motivation through innovation, and I have some slides on it. But when I started talking to people about metrics, there was so much that came out that I think it might be enough for one session, and maybe we do another session on the motivation through innovation stuff, or if anyone wants to talk about over a beer, then maybe we do it that way. So that's okay with you. So dzień dobry. Hello. I'm Mel Rose. I'm the business analyst team lead at Totaljobs Group. I've been there since 2006, and I've worked as a business analyst and an implementation manager on projects in Prince2 methodology and also in Scrum. I'm really passionate about business analysis, and I think it's really important in Scrum as it is in Waterfall. I'm passionate about iterative delivery and supporting our company's strategy, and I'm passionate about learning through feedback. So don't just listen to me, tell me what you think, let me know if you've tried any of these things and if they've worked for you. Unfortunately, don't speak much Polish, so I'm sorry, but the presentation will be in English today. So I'm going to talk about our journey so far. I'm going to talk about metrics from two fronts. Metrics that teams use to measure their own performance and do their own diagnostics about problems that they have, and metrics that we use as a management team to track our agile maturity as an organisation. So kind of two levels that we're going to talk about. Totaljobs Group isn't a startup, it's very much an enterprise level company. It started in 1999 when Totaljobs.com was launched. And we have 7 brands today, and we have 25% of the UK job-seeking market through all of our sites. We have about 70 million job searches a year and 100,000 applications every day. So what I'm trying to do is paint a picture of a company where we're sort of at the enterprise level, we have a lot of traffic, and we may have been a startup once, but we haven't for a long time, so it's hard for us to adopt some of those agile practices and thinking. We moved to adopt Scrum across our IT delivery function in 2009. And this was mostly in response to our business stakeholders becoming more and more frustrated with the amount of documentation they had to go through, the amount of time it took them to get delivery that they wanted. And because our market is a web market, it's a job-seeking market, it's all linked to the economy, things move too quickly for us to deliver projects in 6 months, a year, 18 months. The market's changed, and we weren't keeping pace with the market. So our developer community suggested that Agile Scrum might be a way to go. We looked into it, we got a lot of support. We've worked with ThoughtWorks, I don't know if you guys know, do you know ThoughtWorks? And other Agile consultancies, we've had various speakers in, and we worked with coaches. And for the last couple of years we've been on our own and kind of staying on the path or not. In 2012 we were acquired by Stepstone, who are, does anyone know Stepstone? A big European sort of classifieds company. And we're extending our delivery capacity now into Stepstone's Warsaw office, which is a big part of why we want to get to know the Agile community in Warsaw. And in fact Magdalena is here tonight, who's the business analyst for our team, and we'd love to be part of this community going forward, which is one of the reasons for coming to the meeting. So we're set up, since we adopted Scrum, we have a work stream model which devolves responsibility to the business for all the decision making about what we deliver. And I'll come back to this when we talk about understanding value through Agile delivery and value points that we would assign to work. So we have a marketing work stream that has 2 teams assigned to it. We have a business infrastructure work stream that has 2 teams assigned to it. And we have a product work stream, again, 2 teams assigned to it, and then we have a new team in Warsaw. The teams come up with their own names, so we have Columbo, named after the American detective. We have Enzo, Phoenix. The teams have given themselves a brand and they have their own team identity. So it'll be up to our Warsaw team what they want to call themselves and how they want to manage themselves. So the first layer of measurement that I wanted to talk through is measuring delivery progress. And what I've got is a bunch of illustrations, a bunch of slides and graphics and things that our teams have tried to show how they're doing, to understand how they're doing from the inside. So I'm just going to go through those. If you have any thoughts or questions about them, ask me at the time. You don't have to wait till the end. I want it to be a conversation and not just me talking to you. So this slide, this first slide shows a team who were tracking their progress about a year ago. They used this model, and the vertical axis is showing velocity and story points, and the horizontal axis is breakdown by days. And you can see, and the green shading is the work that they've completed, and the blue shading is the scope of work that they have to do. And so what they were doing was tracking progress against scope, and one of the diagnostics that they came up with as part of this, that between these two red lines that you can see, the scope flatlined, and the team delivery sort of in this period, this was about 5 days here, where the team were facing a technical problem and they couldn't get through this problem, and so they could use this after the fact to do some diagnostics and see that they weren't burning off any stories. The scope had flatlined, and at the point they resolved the issue, the scope increased exponentially. A lot more stuff was put into the sprint, and the scope started to deviate further from what they could actually complete according to their velocity. But what they did have, which I thought was useful, was that each of these blue lines is a feature set in priority order. So if the team tracked its sort of velocity or its likely ability to deliver, it could present different drop dates for these different pieces of functionality, so that the business stakeholders know that they're getting this first piece of work at the earliest drop date, and they can start to get a sense of what the drop dates will be for the other pieces of work. And one of the problems, and I'll probably come back to this again, one of the difficulties that our business stakeholders have is that they can't always predict when they're going to get something, or that's how they feel. And so at least charting it in this way, you can give some likely predictors to a team who have to market something, who have to communicate about something, and need to know when it's going to be delivered. Any questions on that one?
That's a diagram for one sprint or for...
Yes, it's for an iteration, so hence it being broken out by days.
Is it by days, so it's like 2 weeks?
Yes.
3 weeks. Plus.
Yeah. So it's quite short interval management that you can see on a day-by-day basis how the team is progressing. And this is a tool that the team did use to communicate externally in terms of the dates, but the actual graph and the grid was used by the team in the retrospective more to chart how the sprint had gone, what were the issues with scope versus what they could actually complete, how they might manage that in the future. And so a lot of these illustrations that I'm talking through were used very much by the team to understand how they were progressing. And what I want to ask you guys about is, the extent to which business stakeholders want to view and interpret these figures, because some of this stuff goes into quite a level of detail, and some of the teams are tracking quite niche metrics for their own benefit, but there's a limit to the appetite that our business owners have for wanting to know variable drop dates and how much time we spent on things waiting. And I wonder if people have experience of trying to engage business stakeholders on some of these kind of agile concerns about reducing waste and those aspects. If anyone has any thoughts. But I have some more chance to talk about that. Happy for me to go on to the next one? So this one is another team from the same work stream produced this cumulative flow diagram, and this is going a bit more into a lower level of detail for the team to use for its own diagnostic purposes. So the green, as you can probably guess, is the released tasks. There's a red, you can't actually see a lot of red, which shows that the team is fairly lean. They don't have many waiting tasks. The lighter green is done tasks that are waiting to be tested and deployed. And then you've got in-testing tasks, which are the purple. So the testing is less of a bottleneck there. And then you've got tasks that are in development. And then they've also built in this estimated unknown tasks, which is this lighter shading at the top. And for me, this is a sort of contingency that they've built in to allow for anything that comes in to scope, discovered work, problems that they have with testing, and things that are going to add to their workload. So again, this isn't necessarily metrics that the team would show to their business stakeholders. It is much more for the Scrum Master and for members of the team to analyse how the team is performing. Something like this would typically be taken into a retrospective again. It isn't something that I'm privy to as a manager. It's something the team are using very much for their own benefit.
That's updated daily?
Sorry?
That's updated
yes.
daily?
Yeah. And actually, there's some later on sort of showing delivery dates which are linked into elements of team capacity. So there's a whole bunch of stuff sort of powering the spreadsheet, which means it can adjust and be as current as it can be. So this next one is actually one that I took from a presentation that Al Goerner gave. Do you guys know Al Goerner? He's a Valtech. Do you know Valtech? So Valtech, if you know ThoughtWorks, Valtech are a very similar sort of a company. They're an Agile consultancy, and Al Goerner is one of their sort of chief consultants, and he came and did a presentation for us, which I referenced later on, about metrics for accountability, because what this is about the team feeling accountable for delivering good quality work in the time, understanding their capacity, rather than that being put upon them. And Al Goerner was suggesting taking that down to an even deeper level, where as well as, so what he's called the green here is feature requests. So those might be the stories that you had at the start of your sprint or iteration, your existing backlog. Then he's got feature change requests, which is the purple. So that might be that you've had to rework a story, or you've had a new direction that's been put upon the team. The thing that interests me is the blue, which is requirements clarifications. So I don't know how that's distinct from feature change requests. You could argue that in going to clarify a requirement, you might find that there's a change, and I think it would be up to the team what the level of detail they wanted to decompose that to. The other thing they've got in here that I haven't seen anywhere else is technical debt. So that grey that sort of increases at the end there, they've got technical debt that they're itemising and putting metrics around and showing how much time they've spent on that. And I guess it's another way of showing the content of your iteration, because I think if you look at it at a basic level, if you look at your board, you can just see the stories being burnt down. You don't necessarily see the things that get in the way or the things that are slowing down story progression. But I don't know, does anybody here use metrics to this level of detail?
But who categorizes those? Who puts the category on it?
Well, it's a good question. So I imagine in this case, because it's things like technical debt, it probably is the team. Certainly in our business, product owners wouldn't categorise a feature change request as such. They would just say, well, we just want to change what we're doing and we don't give it another name, we just want to put a new requirement in there. So I think it is very much from the point of view of the team.
Oh, they would say, oh, there is a bug in the system.
Yeah, or there's a bug. Bug's my favourite one. When is a bug not a bug? When it's hardly ever a bug. So that's, for me, that's more about the team. But it's a good point, because it leads on to a point that actually it can be quite challenging to show these things to business stakeholders and engage them on why it causes a problem that they've put in a change request, or that the team are building up technical debt in a bid to deliver according to the timeline that they're potentially being pressured to deliver to. I think we might talk a bit more about that later on. This kind of leads on from that point. This is this is one of our product teams put this together, and our product work stream are probably the most challenging in that they want a certain degree of predictability, and they want to know that they tend to have to take on quite large projects, and they want to be able to give a delivery date to their business stakeholders, because a lot of what they do impacts our sales team, and it impacts our recruiters, it impacts our customers. And so, of course, when it's a significant change to our business, they want to give a lot of warning to our stakeholders about what's going to happen when. And consequently, on this chart, which shows the end of one project, where the red line is, and the start of sprint one on a new project, and these were both significantly long projects. So you can see that towards the end of the project on the left, which is the green one, it was in focus, they backlogged very, very heavily. They did a lot of time preparing for the new work. And then when they started the new project, which is here, had a sprint focusing on that, then got halfway through the second sprint and realised that their technical approach wasn't going to cut it. They had to review their technical approach and redesign their technical solution. So you can see then this took up half of that sprint, or half of that iteration, and the whole of this iteration. So the work that was actually meant to be in focus, the team weren't spending as much time actually delivering on that work, spent a lot of time planning and backlogging to a high level of detail, started work, discovered that the technical approach wasn't right, and ended up effectively having to re-engineer that and start again. And the reason that the Scrum Master put these statistics together was again to sort of take to a retrospective and show the product work stream that if they bring in a lot of bugs, which they did in Sprint 5, that purple bar that you see at the end, or if they drive the team down a road of doing a lot of upfront planning, it will necessitate a lot of change. And it transpired that the team, out of all the time they had available, they only spent about 60% of the time on the work that the work stream actually wanted to deliver. And this was intended to exemplify that actually they weren't getting the best out of the team. If the team is only 60% focused on what the business wants them to deliver, that's an issue for the business. But it's a difficult conversation to have because I think there are a lot of changes that are needed by the business. A lot of these bugs, whether they were changes or whether they were actually bugs that needed to be fixed, it isn't necessarily free time that you have to get the team to fix those things. It will impact delivery of another project that you have. So I guess so far these metrics have really been for the team's benefit in order to illustrate a point to the work stream.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So those, obviously all etiquette has to be added the tag or etiquette, right?
Yeah.
So was it pre or post factum?
The team etiquette.
Yeah, when they do statistics, when they add tickets, estimate tickets, they put those tags, or do they do it post factum just to show something to?
They did it after the event to show. So I think it was very much for a retrospective setting, or to sit down with the product owner one-to-one and explain where the team's time was going and discuss ways to get more out of the team.
Is it known why the team go for the wrong technical solution at the beginning, or is it clear what was the problem? Or
I think one of the issues was that it was a very large and complex project that touched a lot of workflows, and there were some edge cases that weren't in scope, but actually they weren't. You know, when you come to do the work, you find that actually those edge cases have a higher impact than was originally thought, and that the solution that had been defined wasn't actually going to meet some of those edge cases. So they had to. It was going to have a significant negative impact on our business if they didn't review the solution for this. So the last sort of slide on team metrics is one. This is another team on a similar project in the product work stream in a bid to try and be a little bit more specific about dates, but manage that around unexpected events. So for the team, the purple line in the middle is the anticipated velocity based on how the team is currently performing and the capacity that the team currently have. The high future anticipated is basically 120% of velocity. So it's an optimistic delivery date if the team becomes very familiar with the work, the whole team is in the office, the whole team doesn't get distracted by other work, and if they have the potential to sort of exceed their current velocity, they might drop at this earlier date. And then the low future anticipated, which sort of you can see there's more variance the further down the timeline you go. The expectation would be that if the team is below capacity, or if the team gets extra work handed in and they're only going to be working at 80% of velocity, then you would have this range of dates. And I think we I think we got some input recently that it's good to work with a range of dates. So you size epics in such a way that you don't give only one date to the business, you give three, an optimistic, a kind of probable, and then a pessimistic. And this chart is linked into the team capacity. So as soon as a team member books holiday, that goes in and powers the spreadsheet so that you can start to see if the velocity is going to slip or if the team's going to be below capacity. And again, this is intended to manage expectations, although for me, your stakeholders are always going to want the high future anticipated date. They're always going to want the most optimistic date that you can give them. And there's obviously some negotiation.
You should always communicate the lowest future anticipated.
To
manage the expectations.
Yeah. So when I asked the Scrum Master, she was saying that is what she does. Is she communicates the lowest future anticipated, but keeps on top of tracking how the team is progressing and keeps on top of capacity.
Because it's not a straight line. We will anticipate waves in velocity.
Probably it just looks nicer that way.
More realistic.
Yeah, it's not a straight line, is it?
I thought about this as well, because you would expect this to be straight, but I thought
You'd expect it
it's
to
just
be
you
straight
just made it a bit wavy just to.
Yeah.
Is it because the updates are done every few days on all the tickets, or?
So they're done. So the updates are done weekly.
Oh, so this is
So I guess the variance is in it being weekly there. So at the start of each week, based on what we know about the team's holiday or events or meetings or anything else that's taking place, it's possible to predict the velocity for that week and predict the possible outcome for the project based on that velocity against the scope that you've got across there, which is a hard red straight line.
So this is, sorry, one more question. So this is manually done like in Excel, for example?
Yes.
There is no software there?
No. I mean, there is software, and it's one of the things that we sort of wrestle with. Should we implement Agile tools? And there's an awful lot of them out there. At the moment, we don't have anything. We're using Excel, and it is all just put in manually by the Scrum Master. But it's all set up so that it updates once you've...
Is the Scrum Master, is it a dedicated role, just a
Yes.
Scrum Master, or is he, for example, technical person as well, or is he...
It's a dedicated role. So across, on each work stream where there are two teams, you have a business analyst who works for two teams, you have a QA, a tester, who works for two teams, and a Scrum Master who works across
And
two
the team size
teams.
itself is?
And then beyond them, we have 4 developers. We have 2 senior developers and 2 mid-range developers
In one team, right?
in one team.
So 8 developers, 1 Scrum Master, 1 business analyst, 1 QA.
4 developers.
So 8 in 2 teams.
Yes. So
And
4 developers
Scrum
in each
Master
team.
for 8 people.
Yes, exactly.
1 business analyst and 1 QA.
For 8 people, yeah. So the team is a self-contained unit. It's just the Scrum Master is attending all the meetings for both teams, and the business analyst is developing the backlog for both teams. We have 4 developers because we do pair programming, so you'll typically have a senior and a junior developer pairing between 10 and 4, and actually a lot of these shifts in velocity are down to where we have a senior out and we can't pair as effectively. We still continue to pair, but you've obviously got 3 people, a senior supporting 2 mid-range devs, so that's going to impact productivity. Any questions on this one?
Yes, actually, because it's actually a question for comment on your side. I thought, judging from not from these graphs, but from the ones before that were used for the retrospective on the team, I assumed that your teams were bigger because it was basically daily tracking, and you said they wanted to use it during the retrospective just to reflect on what they're doing.
Yes.
My question is, can you comment on the overhead of that? Because for a team of 4 and team programming, that to me looks like a lot of tracking, and of course someone has to put it in.
Yes.
But also it means there will be discussions during the retrospective and this kind of stuff. So
That's why I asked if there is a dedicated Scrum Master,
Yeah.
but who will have time to do all this?
Yes, who has
doing
time
is
to
one
do
thing,
it?
but it will come back during the retrospective. It will take a
Also interestingly,
Yeah.
as you said, most of the stuff is actually used to manage expectations between the teams, not to build awareness of each and
Yes.
every team to, for example, help them to improve their process. Like you
Yes.
said, I mean, some of those charts I would expect a team of 4 can just come sit and make up from their heads without any tracking, because they know what they have done during the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Yes, and where they've had problems
Yeah.
and they
Oh, exactly. People are horrible at tracking concrete information, even for yourself. Try to write down what you ate for the last week, for example.
Yeah,
You
just
want
tell
to be
me
aware
what
of
you-
your diet.
What
It's
you
not
eat
so
for
easy.
breakfast for last 5 days?
But I mean, here we're talking about the granularity of whether most of our work went to refactoring versus whether most of our work went to features, and whether it was 60 versus 70%. Probably no one really cares that much.
Yeah, but,
Yeah, but on those, yes.
that's the purpose of metrics. We don't talk about feelings, we don't talk about our memories, which can be blurry, right?
Yeah,
We
okay.
talk about- we
I'm
want
just
some hard
the
data.
comment is related to the comment you made. It seems that there is a lot of overhead.
a lot of tracking. Yeah, I did ask so I asked this Scrum Master in particular, because she was saying she's doing it for another team, and I guess I worry about the reasons it's being done. Is it done because the team don't have a view of this stuff themselves and they have to be shown
But
it?
it's fine, but if you go back 2 or 3 slides,
Yeah,
those two,
yeah.
I went specifically those two because this looks very detailed to me. And my question to
Yeah.
you is, do you personally think it's worth the effort? Because I sort of assume that it actually takes quite a few hours every sprint.
It's a good question. I guess what we're trying to do is have the team empowered to do what they think they would like to do. The interesting thing for me is that the teams don't tend to present this stuff back beyond within their own environment. So until I started looking into putting stuff together for this presentation, I hadn't seen some of these diagrams. I know they exist and I can go and look at them any time, but we sort of come on to thinking about information radiators. Actually, a lot of the time, if you go to the Teams board in Totaljobs Group, you can see all the stories, but we don't tend to see things like burn-ups on boards so much these days. And we don't see all of these kind of cumulative flow diagrams. And it's a question I have: how much do the team study this stuff? What do they use it for? Does it help them make decisions about? So refactoring is a good example. One of the teams, recently had spent an awful lot of time refactoring, and we have a sort of a 10% rule that asks teams to spend 10% of their time leaving the environment in a better state than they found it. Because you could refactor endlessly, and the value of refactoring starts to go down over time. You can't keep doing it without a clear objective. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in those things and trying to shut the stable door and tidy things up and set up environments. We had a team who spent a couple of weeks on environment setup before a project started, when there might have been more pragmatic ways to do that and start delivery more quickly. And it's often true that teams are very busy, focused on the work, and not necessarily having the time to pause and reflect on how that's going, how effective are they, how much time are they burning on technical debt or refactoring or re-backlogging stories. Teams who've developed a backlog to a high level of detail far in advance and then have had to re-backlog. They've had to go back to those stories and revisit them and rework them and re-estimate them. And I haven't seen any calculations of how much time, because that's waste. How much time did we waste doing that? So I think this is where I do wonder. It's a question for me, because I know that a lot of our business stakeholders wouldn't look at this and aren't interested in this, and all they want to know is, when am I going to get, hello, I didn't see them, when am I going to get what I expect? I don't mind how you do it, I don't mind what's happening in the background, I just want it on this date so that I can tell my stakeholders.
Well, the reason I have asked is that I've had in my history a couple of teams that actually, as you said, they go into refactoring endlessly. They went into measuring everything, and it turned out for no good reason. So
they wanted to measure everything.
Yeah, because
without a clear goal.
We are geeks, so we like to all kind of tools and measurements and whatnot. And it's really easy, at least from my perspective. As I said, I've seen a few teams just getting caught in this.
Yes.
And really burning a lot of time for this. And there was no really value for them actually.
Yes, that's right.
It's not as much as the work.
It would be interesting to ask the teams what they use. It would be interesting to ask developers on the team What do they use this for? What do they infer from this?
One
And perhaps
thing to notice is, first of all, cumulative flow diagram is part of every Kanban software out there. And second, you can spend 5 minutes a day after stand up putting the numbers into Excel sheet, and that's all you need to put.
it doesn't take very long. So
For 2 hours,
But,
So the Scrum Master who did this-
The biggest example is how long we're discussing this right now.
Because the Scrum
And
Master
what
who
is
did this
our
one said
time?
it's about half an hour a week she spends putting these figures in, and so from their point of view it's not a huge overhead, and we have dedicated Scrum Masters who are responsible for being guardians of the process and making sure that the team is working effectively and learning and improving. And I guess that's what a lot of these are for. But actually, if you explicitly said, what are you tracking it? What are you tracking this for? Why are you using this format? I think it'd be interesting to hear what people say about it. Maybe I'll bring them to the next meeting and we talk about it some more. Any more? So the other aspect of metrics that I wanted to sort of touch on is the sort of potentially punitive aspect of metrics. So a team feeling that they're being measured, and I'm sure you may be familiar with this quotation by Eliyahu Goldratt. Tell me how you measure me and I will tell you how I behave. So one of the problems is that if you apply metrics in the wrong way or for the wrong reasons, they become a bit of a stick to beat teams with, and it changes team behaviour. So there's a really good article on InfoQ by someone called Scott McHugh that I'll maybe send around the group afterwards. It's one of the best articles I've read for a while, so it was lucky I read it before coming here, about how not to destroy a team with metrics and for it to become a sort of all-consuming thing that teams are only thinking about the metrics and they've forgotten about what it is they're actually there to do. And one of the things that Scott McHugh is talking about is the observer effect, where a team may start, their estimates may start to be skewed by the fact that they're under a lot of scrutiny to deliver by certain dates. There are two things that tend to happen. We've had examples where teams are understandably going into something that they're not familiar with, going into the unknown, feeling under pressure from the business. So you can take from that the estimates are going to be impacted by that. If a team is afraid that they're going to be judged, criticised or castigated for not delivering something on time, of course they're going to build a bit of contingency into their estimates. And even, as any kind of management group who's kind of accountable to a higher power, they are going to build a bit of contingency in and perhaps not be as honest as they might be, or estimate too far ahead, too big. And then the other aspect is if a team are given a very aggressive deadline and they want to meet that deadline and they want to deliver for the business, they might give unrealistically small estimates and then cause themselves problems, because when they start work, of course work is always bigger once you get to look at it, or once you have problems. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the potential punitive aspects of using metrics. So that was the observer effect. And Al Goerner, who I mentioned earlier on, did this presentation which is available online. If you Google it, you can find all the slides there that he went through. It's called Agile Measurement and Metrics for Accountability. And what was interesting to me about this presentation is, although he's shown some charts and we've all looked at these graphs and these statistics and these dates and these velocity ranges, what Al Goerner is suggesting teams do is use much more qualitative metrics. So ask themselves questions. Where are we? Are we on track? Are we in trouble? If we're in trouble, why are we in trouble? And actually have a conversation about it rather than sort of looking at the charts. And what can we do to improve? And he's painting a picture of having to manage expectations inside the team and outside the team, and the different reasons that you might use these questions. Excuse me. So you obviously want to motivate the team to improve. You need to manage the expectations of your project sponsors and your stakeholders. And as a Scrum Master, you need to detect where there are risks that need to be managed. But it was interesting to me that these questions are very much quantitative rather than qualitative. And you can have all the metrics you like, but actually if you don't have a meaningful sense of where things are going wrong, those things aren't really going to help you. The other pitfall for me of using metrics is that you can often end up in a situation where you use a metric because it's easy to find rather than it being a metric that is actually valuable. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to have a conversation about this, but there's a good quote from William Bruce Cameron, who said that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So, so lines of code is one example. There are organisations who track people based on the lines of code that they produce, and this cartoon, which may be too far away, is a developer being taken to task because they only wrote 15 lines of code, but these were the 15 lines of code that cured cancer. But it doesn't matter, you were meant to write 30 lines of code. So it's a metric that you can easily find, you can easily count the lines of code that you're producing, but it doesn't tell you anything about the quality of that code or the value that it delivered to the organisation. And actually what you're more likely to do is end up with bloated, flabby code that isn't doing anything for you. Other metrics that have sort of been discussed as metrics that aren't particularly helpful are the number of unit tests you write. So from a development community point of view, especially when you're trying to implement test-driven development and those practices, having a target for unit tests might seem like a good idea, but again, unit tests don't have any value unless they're actually doing something meaningful for you, for the organisation, and ensuring the quality of the product. So you could write a bunch of not very good unit tests and meet your quota, but it doesn't help you think about what you're trying to deliver as an organisation. The other one that I know you'll all be aware of is comparing team velocity. So team velocity isn't something you would compare between teams. One team might estimate something at 50 points, another team might estimate something at 35. It doesn't mean the first team is less good. It just means they work in a different way and they estimate in a different way. And the other velocity element is don't focus on individual velocity and don't target individuals on velocity, because it's meant to be about the team and what that person brings to the team rather than them as an individual. Does anyone else have any thoughts on metrics that aren't particularly helpful, or the metrics that people have asked for that may not be useful?
In general, metrics are very tricky, and I even remember someone telling a story about cashiers at supermarket.
Oh yeah.
And they were introduced metrics, how many products a minute they could scan, and then they find a way how to omit that and how to go around, and they kind of go on a break, then scan number of articles, they go back from the break, scan number of articles again, and then the average is much higher.
Yes, yeah. So gaming, people start gaming metrics as soon as you start to target.
It's really difficult with the clients if you have a service company to explain them what velocity is.
Yes.
And they always want you to increase velocity.
Yes.
So you increase estimations, and they say, but this is so high of the estimation, and they don't have this sense of relativity that it doesn't really mean anything, right? And finally, developers will always tell you that there is no way to improve velocity, when in fact there is, but it's always really hard work, like working with technological debt and improve the code, and it's usually about long-term investments. And if you will try to improve velocity in the short run, that almost always gets you in trouble.
Well, you're more likely, I think, to build up things like technical debt to try and get the team to put more work through. Yeah. You don't care about the consequences. Yeah. It's going to cause problems further down the chain.
Product produce more technical debt and slow team even further.
Yeah.
Did you notice any of those problems in your teams?
Yes. So certainly, I think where teams feel under pressure, more likely to estimate conservatively, and in a bid to exceed expectations. But that points to a symptom of kind of lack of confidence, perhaps, or a lack of trust, or a lack of kind of the team's not feeling empowered enough to say, well, actually, it isn't realistic to do this by this date. But I think it comes back to that same problem, and it will be the same certainly for businesses who have external clients to deliver to, because our clients are internal. groups like sales, like marketing, customer support. But it's very hard to have a conversation with those people where you say, we can spend 2 weeks on this and then we'll see. You know, it would be a great way to work, but it doesn't help us manage expectations. And being able to estimate accurately involves the business being able to define a minimum marketable feature set, the absolute must-haves, and that's also quite hard, especially when you're replacing one existing product with a new one. It's hard to say that you don't need all of that functionality, and those are difficult conversations to have. So the team end up feeling slightly fearful that then they don't understand the full scope of the work. They're going to discover work, so they're going to overestimate. Do any of you have experience of this happening where you work?
Every second product.
Everything?
Actually, for a company that does work as a company that is outsourced to, about the only real metrics is asking previous customers if they were happy in the end, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That works.
Yes.
That's okay. That's a longer discussion.
We'll come on to a bit of that. Yeah. Okay. So from a management perspective, we do something called Team Weather, which again it's not quantitative. It's much more qualitative about how the teams seem. Every week we walk around the department as a group, and we see 3 of our 6 teams, and then the following week we see the other 3. So that every 2 weeks we've had a chance to talk to all of the teams. And so I think what I've said is we don't really look at those charts that you've just seen. We walk around the teams, we look at the boards, the team's boards, and we look at the team dynamic. How do the team seem? How do they feel? Do they seem happy? Do they feel under pressure? Does it seem like they're fed up about something? How is the... Sorry?
Yeah, how?
We is the management team for the technology function at Totaljobs Group. So there's our CIO, there's our CTO, and then there's functional team leads.
There's
so
like a bunch of senior guys, like
there
board
are
level,
2 senior guys
walking around without.
Yes, so
guys,
there
how
is
do
a
you
board
feel
director
today?
there. Well, so what I would say is, although we're not a start-up and we're not the smallest company, we're quite close to the managers. The managers are quite close to the teams, and they have quite regular contact with them. I'd like to think we're approachable. Our CEO is a friendly guy, and he comes around, he's genuinely interested, and also he can offer support to teams if they are having a problem with something. It's their chance to say, actually, we've got this stakeholder who hasn't been coming back to us, and he can get in touch with them and help the team out. So it's intended to be supportive. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that's how it's perceived, I think is not a question I can answer. But it is very much about how the team... So every 2 weeks each team has this walk around. And as I say, it is quite informal, and we do literally just walk around the office and stand at the boards and chat to the team. And we probably ought to do it more often as a sort of temperature check and make it more natural. But the teams generally prepare for it, and they nominate somebody to speak who's not the usual, like not the Scrum Master always. Sometimes it's one of the developers who talks about what they're doing. So the team dynamic is very much things like, do they understand why they're doing what they're doing? You know, has it been made clear to them how this is making value for the organisation? Do they understand what the goal is, what we're trying to achieve with this work, as opposed to beyond their own sort of functional thinking? The workstream dynamic is very much about how do the senior members of that business stakeholder group feel about how the team is doing. So the team might think everything is going along fine, but we know that the director responsible for the project is actually quite frustrated, and it's an opportunity to find out where there's a disconnect there, and they can talk about it. We talk about the last release that they had, and I'm going to talk about release metrics as a measure for agile maturity. So how was their last release? Did they have problems with it? Were the problems because other teams were involved? Did they cause problems for other teams? Did the release take longer than they expected? The technical health, so the technical approach, have they had some input from architecture? Do they need input? Are they happy with their technical solution, their technical quality? Their backlog health, so we've had some teams who develop an overly healthy backlog where they've looked at too many stories in too much detail too far in advance, We've had teams who operate a very lean backlog, so lean that on occasion you go and ask the team what they'll be doing next week and they're not quite sure. So somewhere in the middle, there's a happy medium of maybe having 2 to 4, 6 weeks of stories that you've got in detail, and then fuzzy epics ahead of that. Release health, which is really about how they're tracking against expectation. And iterative health, so in order to drive an iterative delivery strategy, we'll ask questions like, when are you next going to release? What will you learn from your next release? What do you expect to find out? How are you going to measure what you put out, the success of what you put out? And from that we can sort of identify risks and issues. And then what we do is we have a follow-up meeting, just the management group, and we have this very high-tech weather board. We should get some of those, symbols that you stick to it. And we literally go through each team that we've seen, and for each of those sort of metrics that I've just gone through, we say whether it's a sun, is it a sun with a small cloud because we can see trouble on the horizon, is it a tornado, is it a thunderstorm, and it's a visual representation of where we think that team is at, and if we think that there are things that could use our intervention or support, then we put a note in the risks or issues column, and one of us from the management team gets involved with the team or the stakeholder or whoever it is that they need to engage to help solve the problem.
Is it connected to the end of sprint, or it's just a run?
It's a regular thing. So wherever they are in their sprint project or iteration, we go around all the time.
Okay, so it isn't, for example, at the end of each sprint, it's
No.
sometime random.
Yes, yeah.
So this is a snapshot of time, and rows are teams, and
Yes.
columns are
Areas.
problems.
So this is the teams on the left. Along the top, those boxes, those are the parameters we talked about, team dynamic, work stream dynamic, etc. You've got risks and issues along the side here. So we don't put risks up that the team have in hand. We put risks up that we think the team could use some support with, because it's to help them. And then on the end of here, we have an iterative health column, which is a new entry because we're trying to track how iterative teams are.
And is there any follow-up for this work?
Yes, so the following week we go through the risks and issues that we have raised up, and we go
So
through
we are
the
saying
three
we are talking about management only,
Yes.
or management with
management. So someone will have an action, for example, to go and talk to the Scrum Master about a particular issue. So rather than take the team to task when we're all standing around the board, and it may not necessarily be such a positive thing, it may be better for some person to have a conversation with the Scrum Master, or in my case, if the backlog is a bit lean or a bit thin, or there's some issue with it, then I would have a chat with the business analyst, because it's more to do with that person's role in the team, and if they need some particular support. So it depends what the issue is, how we address it. But I guess what I wanted to say is that what we're trying to achieve is to have a management structure that is about walking around and finding out, rather than expecting reports to be brought to us. We want to understand better where we should focus leadership attention. And ideally, we'd like to create an environment for people who can lead to step up and solve the issues themselves. We don't want to have to sort of parachute in and solve problems. We'd rather that the team felt empowered to solve them. Again, I think it's a balance for us where we feel we have to intervene, or where we'd like the team to be able to step up for themselves. But that's what we should be using these metrics for. Not punitive, but supportive and for coaching and those kinds of things.
Does this overlap with tasks of the Scrum Master in the organization? Because he should be also very sensitive to all those issues, right?
Yes. So the ideal is that all of these issues get sorted out within the team. But I guess, so a typical example would be, we went around recently and there was a project where there were a lot of external subject matter experts. There was a UX person, a content person, and a designer. The designer was in New Zealand. The UX person had a lot of time out of the office and was only in 1 or 2 days, and the content person's in another office. And they don't naturally talk to each other, but they were all needed to talk to each other for this project to succeed. And you could already tell that was going to be an issue for the team. And you're absolutely right, it is an issue for the Scrum Master to resolve. So that was about getting together with that Scrum Master and making sure they had some robust process in place to manage that communication and to flag that it was an issue and to make sure that it was being resolved.
This is a kind of storm-like issue or a cloud-like issue?
As a cloud, yeah.
And what would be a storm-like issue?
A storm-like issue.
So I'm just asking because it seems very interesting, and the fact that you're doing it every 2 weeks seems kind of lightweight.
Yeah.
And fun with all those like pictures and it's pretty cool. But also I'm kind of relating to the question of what's the level of your involvement?
Yes.
And what's the level of Scrum Master involvement?
So I guess a tornado issue that we had recently was we had a team that have been working on our mobile platform, and they made a change to the workflow for mobile users applying for a job via mobile. And as a result of the change they made, it became clear that after their release, CVs weren't being attached to applications, and that's a massive problem for us. And so at that point, that is a tornado issue because it affects our key performance indicators.
They didn't realise that this would be an issue themselves.
They did realise, but our issue was how was it not picked up before the release went out. So I guess that was our intervention, and the team reacted by going into very heavily testing and maybe spending more time on testing than perhaps was pragmatic. But that was a natural response to having felt very much in the spotlight for a significant problem. So again, it's about trying not to be punitive. It's about trying to understand how we can support teams to learn from these things going wrong. But obviously, we've got some key metrics as a business that we have to adhere to. But I think this brings up that whole issue of it's got to be all right to fail, and it's got to be all right to learn from failure. But there's a balance to be struck there from a management point of view. How much you can afford to kind of let a team fail.
Is the board visible to everyone or locked away?
This is a good question. So what we tend to do with this board is this is a whiteboard. So we leave the risks and issues up, but we take a picture of it and then we rub it off. And then the next week we come around to it because I don't know, maybe it should be visible, and maybe it should always be obvious to the team when there is an issue and that we're tracking the issue. But I guess the interaction we have with the teams is very much in the team space. So you wouldn't really want another team coming along and seeing that one of the teams was having a problem and the perception that would create. And
is it that? I mean, why? That it's the one company, and everyone has issues from time to time.
It's a good point. Maybe there's a case for leaving it and having the teams be more aware of it. At the moment, they're not.
They know that you do it.
Yes. Yeah.
So they know that there is certain evaluation in the end.
Yes. Yeah.
And how long have you been doing that process?
Probably about a year we've been doing this, and we've tried a number of different things. So we had a process when we first started using Scrum where the Scrum Masters would come to the weekly management meeting and they would bring the burn up and they would bring risks and issues and those things with them and they would report back. But I think it started to feel like that wasn't a positive engagement. So we moved more to this model where we get the whole team together and a greater kind of population of the management team. And ask some specific questions around how they're working in the sprint. And we've even evolved that walk around based on feedback. So we had a case where there were a high number of managers walking around, and the teams felt that wasn't entirely positive. That there were too many people asking too many questions, and it wasn't always constructive. So we've now moved to a model where we've got the CIO and the CTO, because actually they're the people that the team fed back that they liked having that interaction. They don't ordinarily get to engage with our CTO and our
CIO, whereas the functional line managers deal with the teams quite a lot. So what we've ended up with is the CTO and the CIO, and then one or two of the functional leads, not everybody. So it became a bit of a cast of thousands walking around, and the teams didn't enjoy seeing this like stack of people coming to talk to them. So it isn't perfect, and we may evolve it over time so that it's more visible to the teams. But I think there's a risk that if you have a tornado up here, that it's punitive and it isn't a positive. We don't really have that many tornadoes.
Well, it actually depends on the kind of culture of this company you would like to end up with in, say, 5 years. Right?
Yeah.
Because I see what you are describing is that you are trying to fill that ditch between the management and the people, whatever we call them. But
the drones.
Of course, I don't know your company at all, but it feels to me from what you are saying is that there is still this clear separation. If there is a bunch of people walking in every 2 weeks, it sounds like a process and not like we are in it together.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I actually immediately thought that this would be shared with everyone. Like looking at even the picture, this is something like that you would want to share even.
Yeah.
Do you have any offices in Nordic countries or in Netherlands?
Do we have
offices in Nordic countries?
No. So we've only been London-based up to now, and then we've just got this team.
Because in those countries they have very flat structure, and then basically the whole culture is based on we are all in this together, and you could be manager, but that means only that you have different responsibilities. But in the end, we play the same game. And British culture and Polish culture are very different.
That is actually interesting because Scrum Master should be, by definition, as the Scrum defines it, should be a member of the team. When you specifically said that Scrum Master is a part of higher management, right?
No, the Scrum Master is a member of the team.
Okay, but the Scrum Masters kind of attend those management meetings, right?
They used to. We used to ask them to come and present back. We used to ask them to come to the meeting and present back, as opposed to being a member of the management team. So the Scrum Master is a member of the Scrum team. Okay. We have a program board now where Scrum Masters attend a meeting about longer term programs of works that have multiple sprints or iterations or phases, to track those things and gives them a chance to escalate issues and take responsibility in the Scrum Master role, and they're quite positive. I mean, I would say the team will be aware of where there are issues. It's just that this is something that we use as a management team to define our approach and help us decide what's the best approach for dealing with the team. I mean, touching on your comment about the culture, it is an interesting one because there is a bit of competition between the teams, and we do have a sort of Agile team of the month or Agile in action, like the team that's exhibited a particularly good Agile behaviour, and we try and foster good practice by rewarding teams who are Agile, and there's a lot of kind of healthy competition for those things. But maybe you should have more of we're all in it together.
This Agile part.
Sorry?
It depends who is judging whether it's the Agile or what is not, because in the end the team should basically adapt the process to whatever suits them, right?
Yeah. As the discussion is getting longer, I guess we should move it to beer. I have one more very quick question. Yes. Do you do rotations between teams, right? Take this developer and switch with the developer?
So that's another interesting question. So we did do it. We had a process where we did it on a cycle to expose people to new domains and new projects, and it seemed like it was a good thing. But the feedback we got was that there was too much churn, and actually developers didn't, the team was changing all the time. I mean, you could argue that it should be possible to flex and adapt with change, but actually the teams felt it was too frequent and it was too much. And so now we've moved to a process where people can express a preference to change. I'd like to have more product experience, I'd like to work on marketing projects, and as and when there's an opportunity to move them, because we have turnover and organic changes and people need to move for different reasons. So we commit to moving people who want to move when they'd like to move, rather than enforcing moves, which didn't feel like a positive thing when we actually went through it. Shall I whiz through the Agile maturity metrics and then have beer? Is that a good idea?
Okay.
I have one additional question
Yes.
concerning the weather report. So I understand that you have a lot of measures. You've shown some figures in the previous slide, and you have that one. And I understood that you collect that information for 1 year or longer. Did you observe any correlation between that measures, between that very, let's say, unusual measure and others? Is it correlated?
It isn't correlated, and this is where I guess I'm not here to say that we're the best at everything. We're on a journey and we're still trying a lot of this stuff out. And when I come on to the Agile maturity metrics, these are things that we're really just starting to explore. So we haven't tracked those things, or we haven't correlated them together. And actually, we haven't maintained a record of that weather week on week. It's more about, in the moment, what do we need to do now to support the teams, rather than using it to build up a long-term picture of team performance. It is much more about being able to provide management support where it's needed. So it's a good question, and arguably we should do more to track it.
Don't you think that, it is my perception that this is a reverse measure, I can say. All previous measures, me personally, if I be in a team member role, feels that somebody is measuring me, and it's me will be responsible to correct action if measure is not satisfactory for management. Concerning that weather report, I think that I feel more free, more frank, put what is really real, and I do not feel so much responsible for improvement. Is it proper perception or not?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you asking about individuals' accountability within a team?
Or maybe my English is not perfect, so I can
But I
say
think
It's better than my Polish.
But I think it's about accountability. So when you're actually measuring each person in the first way, then it's actually that each person can take an action to improve. When you have the second model with clouds, it's more of you own the improvement because it's your issue that you discuss among yourself.
Is correct concerning my intention.
Right.
That in all previous slides, it's only feeling, but I feel that it's me who will be responsible to do something with that measure, to improve, to speed up or something like that. Concerning that weather report, I feel yes, I can be frank, saying I'm not very happy, atmosphere is not good, and I think it's you, as a manager or somebody else, responsible for that. So I think that this is also the reason that I asked you a question about correlation, and this is the reason that I feel very big value in that as a supporting additional, completely different measure, something like 360 degrees.
Yeah. So the idea being that the managers don't have to go and say, what are you going to do to sort out this problem? That people have an idea themselves that there is a problem and that they could do something about it. Is that what you mean? Should we have a chat over a beer?
Yeah,
Should we do that? So let's do that. It will be me who's not getting it. So I just wanted to say a few things about Agile maturity, which is different to teams tracking metrics for their own benefit. So these are some experiments that we're trialling on measuring our Agile maturity. So we're just starting to measure cycle time more formally across the teams. So our infrastructure teams had already started measuring cycle time, and for us it's a good metric for Agile maturity because the longer a story sits around not being delivered, the more likely it is to change, the more likely there is to be waste, and the less chance there is that it will actually deliver value to the organisation. So the teams are starting to record the date that a user story was created, the date that they started development on the story, which hopefully isn't too long after it was created, the date that it was done, and the date that it was released to the end user. And the metric we really care about is the elapsed time between a user story being created and being released to an end user. So thinking back to some of those larger projects where we did a lot of backlog planning up front, you were talking about 6 months, before the story was actually going to be released to the end user, and we want to reduce that so that there's less waste and less rework required. I wanted to talk a bit about value points, which we haven't succeeded with using, but there is a lot of talk, if you read some blogs and measuring agile maturity, about value points. The reason a lot of companies don't get this off the ground is because you're reliant on the business to assign value points to work. And if you think back to the work streams we have marketing, we have product development, and we have business infrastructure, and they will all have a different definition of value. Is it revenue generating? Is it cost saving? Is it something that we measure in some other way? So measuring the impact of what you do, what you deliver, as opposed to the performance that you displayed when doing the work. I'd love to know if anybody has any experience of using value points. Has anyone used value points? No?
Years ago.
Okay. We'll talk about it later. Release quality. So I touched on this a bit earlier. There are two aspects to release quality that we're looking at. There's the release itself, how well the team put the release together, how long it took, the extent to which it impacted other teams, how easy it was for ops to deploy it, whether or not they had to go back and test things as a result of the technical quality not being good. But then the other side of release quality is, did it cause any issues in live to our end users? So the CV issue that I talked about earlier would be a classic example of that. But there might be smaller issues where a bug is introduced somewhere else in the site. So release quality is something that we're starting to try and track in a more meaningful way, as opposed to it just being perception. And then data-driven decisions for us is a big indicator for whether or not we're becoming agile as an organisation, because data-driven decisions involves the business demonstrating agility and actually using feedback. So if you think back to if I think back to the old days where we just released something and then just started the next thing and never looked at what that release did, what it delivered for us, did it meet its objectives, did it meet the goals that were stated in the business case? There's a maturity involved in actually having some metrics in place after you've released, and had a few case studies for that, but we can talk about those a bit later. But crucially, this is a quotation from Senior VP of Advertising at Google: data can either back up your instincts or prove them totally wrong. And a lot of what we've done as an organisation has been down to having an expert who knows what we should do, or having a director or somebody whose job it is to say what the product should do, what the market wants. But you can do all the research you like until you actually release something to the market. You don't know if you're right, and we're getting better at accepting that what we're doing is testing a hypothesis. We're assuming that we'll get this result out of making this change, and it doesn't necessarily follow. And I can give a quick example of this from our mobile development. When we looked at our mobile applications, we wanted to improve them. We had an apply for this job button, which when you scrolled down the job details, up and down the job details, it moved, and so you'd lose sight of it, and you didn't always have access to it. And we hypothesised that if we put it in a static bar at the bottom of the screen, as you were scrolling through the job details, you decide to apply, you can always see the button. When we actually rolled this out, our applications went down by 6%. We don't know why, but it didn't prove our hypothesis that applications would go up. So what did we do? We rolled back to the current situation and we try another experiment.
And then it also went down by 6%.
No, just clawed it back up. The other thing we did, and this is just intended to show that we did the work, to analyse our mobile user journeys. And what we found was we send an email alert called Jobs by Email. It goes out to any job seeker who's applied for a job or proactively signed up for it on the site. A lot of job seekers look at this email on their mobile phone, and it contains links to jobs that you might want to apply for. So 50% of our visits to the mobile site were from this email alert. But what happened when the job seeker actually went to apply for the job was that they were asked to sign in. And so the 5% of job seekers that went through to apply for a job, when they were asked to sign in, 4% of them dropped off, only 1% went through to actually apply. So we hypothesised that if we took away this kind of barrier that was stopping them from getting straight to apply, and soft logged them in when they came to us through JB on mobile, our hypothesis was proven, and we did retain all of the job seekers that went through to apply, did go through the process rather than dropping off because they were asked to sign in. So those are just two examples of data-driven development that we did. Another one was that we funneled some traffic through A, B, C and D testing, which I know you'll be familiar with. We had our home page, which has 15 calls to action and 189 links. And we hypothesised that if we had fewer, clearer calls to action on these landing pages, we would get a better conversion in the areas that are important to us, which is new email sign-ups, new CVs and applications. But again, we found that new email sign-ups went up. People who saw the CV, which is another important metric for us, for our recruiters, went up. Applications went down again by 6%. It's a bit of a recurring theme, that one. So again, so we can tweak that approach based on the fact that we could do more to maximise our applications.
Maybe it goes down every time you change something.
I know, this is it, right? So, but we, at least we know, because we
yeah, but sometimes it's hard because if you measure this, but is this really valuable? Maybe it's because people rejected the wrong application. So up to now they would apply to the Canvas, apply to many jobs, and now they selected only the ones that fit better.
Yeah.
So the applications went down, but maybe it was
It's a question of what you measure.
Yeah,
And the
it's
question
Yeah,
of
yeah.
what you measure.
get some answers from data, but
But the
Well, I
question
think
you
is,
need to misinterpret them.
which one is important? Maybe the important KPI is how many applications is being sent, not how many valid applications.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that was one of our key KPIs, but actually recruiters get a lot of duplicate applications and it annoys them. So actually we're implementing some work now that will make our applications go down, but it's going to be a better experience for the recruiter. So it depends what you measure. So
what is the baseline of that measure? I mean, if you do not any changes, is it stable? Just to understand, we are comparing what to what.
absolutely. So where's the control group?
Yeah.
So the control group in that instance was the home page, which stayed the same, and we had applicants going to the home page. So I guess you've always got to have something that doesn't change, and then you have your A, B and D pages were the alternative. So I've extrapolated those high-level figures from a huge sheet of figures from that test, just to give an indication. But yes, you do have to have a control and randomise your sample to some extent in order to get valid data. But actually I'd say, this is one area where I do feel like we are really maturing as an organisation. The fact that our product owners drive this sort of behaviour and this sort of thinking, I think is really good. So we're on a road. It's a twisty road. It's a mountainous, rocky road. Our next things that we're trying to tackle are team engagement, getting our teams closer to the business so that they feel more in touch with what they're doing. Investigate Scrum tools. Somebody asked about Scrum tools. We don't use anything at the moment, but partly because we're going to have a team in Warsaw, so we won't be able to go up to their board as easily. Do we want to adopt something across the board? We want to implement our release quality reporting. We want to follow up on what we're doing with cycle time. We want to form a happy and successful Polish team. We need to discuss with Stepstone, who are our new owners, how they measure success, productivity, all of those things, versus how we measure them. And then these were some of the sources. Eric Rees, we were talking about earlier, I think he's a real inspiration for a lot of this stuff. Sean McHugh is a great article online. I'll put a link to it on the Google group discussion because it's worth a read. Good metrics and bad metrics. And then the Goerner Agile measurement and metrics for accountability. So I will put this up on your group so that you've got those to access. And thanks very much for having me.
Questions?
Or beer? Questions or beer?
So I guess let's head to the closest spot available.
McHugh, would you lead everyone to the hall?
With pleasure.
So McHugh, with pleasure, will lead us to the hall.